In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Welcome back to another edition of the Daily Memphian's Memphis Grizzlies podcast. This is your host, Grizzlies beat writer Drew Hill, joined as always by columnist Chris Herrington. Chris is in Minnesota still. I'm just curious, just to start, we need a wellness check. What is the temp outside right now in Minnesota?
It is not bad at the moment. It's 29. So, I mean, it is December after all. So it's been in like the high 20s into the mid 30s the last few days. It's going to get a little colder by the end of the week, but it warmed up enough that it melted whatever little snow we had. So we got clear ground cover at the moment.
Wow. That's impressive. Yeah. You may have seen on Twitter, I was driving home. We had our Daily Memphian Company Christmas party last night at Crosstown Brewing Company. Unfortunate that you weren't able to make it, Chris, but there was a thunderstorm going on outside, and as I was driving back to my place, I was driving down Winchester. Massive fire in Collierville.
I did actually. I saw that on your social media. Actually, you were my breaking news reporter on that one.
I know. Massive fire in Collierville. I couldn't believe it. And that's what it felt like when the Grizzlies lost to the Los Angeles Lakers. Because if you were on social media, it looked like a massive fire had broken out. No, I mean, it was that was a bad game. That was a bad game. And I mean, it was also a little hot in that game against Brooklyn on Friday night since we last spoke. So we only have two games to talk about, but two interesting ones for sure.
The Lakers game, it's a long season. You're going to have bad nights. You end up with a 6 point. I know Marcus Smart hit like another shot at the end, but even with that, it's single digits. It's 9 point, right? So it ends up being a single digit loss on the road against a team that's in the playoff mix, in which they have a great player who was having a great night in Anthony Davis, who's been a top 10 player in the league this season. That said, I do think the start of that game, the Lakers came into that game with more focus and intensity than the Grizzlies did. The Grizzlies just felt off all night. And I come out of that game more. It was a disappointing performance by the Grizzlies. I still don't think much of the Lakers. They had LeBron James rested. They had Anthony Davis having an MVP level game. They're at home. The Grizzlies are playing poorly, and they still almost lose. The Lakers still almost blow that game late. I still don't think much of the Lakers. It's just one game, but it was not an enjoyable performance by the Grizzlies to start that game. I was not impressed with the way they approached that game.
Yeah, so some behind the scenes here on how the Daily Memphian operates. I know this year we've been writing our stories a little bit later after games so we can have them better, and not just with partial stats and whatnot when you publish right as the game ends. And I say that to say, I used to hate the partial stats, like the first quarter stats, the first quarter shooting percentage, whatever it might be. But that was notable in that Lakers game because the first quarter was notably terrible. That was probably what cost them the game. They just had no energy. And the number one signal was they couldn't make a layup. They were 3 of 13 to start the game in the paint. Yeah. That was the number one sign. This could be a long one,
Ja just seemed off from the jump, and Ja's been great most of the season, and we've seen him in playoff basketball, so whatever, it's one night. Some of the other younger players on the team, I think, over the course of the season, you take, you evaluate it over time, right? But I've gotten to the point where I'm more interested in how certain guys look in games that I consider more playoff caliber games. I'm more interested in that on the road against the Lakers, the way some guys look, than I am at home against Charlotte or whatever, I'm trying to think about playoff level basketball. And that was a game where it felt like they were struggling to find answers with some of their depth that has come through for them most of the season.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. Like I thought that the first half basically captured the whole game because it was so ugly. They they outscored the Lakers in the second half by double digits, and they still didn't never really felt like they threatened in that game. And as soon as Anthony Davis came back in that fourth quarter, it felt like that was pretty much going to do it. Um, but I'm with you. I do wonder, like, you don't want this to be a trend, right? Especially in these West Coast games. For some reason, when they head all the way out there on the West Coast, it doesn't feel like they play very great very often, you know?
Well, they are at this point, and this is something I've been struggling with, is that we're like almost more than a quarter of the way into the season. We're talking about what they're 18-9, so that's 27 games is no longer a small sample, right? If you're good through 27 games, you're good. But the schedule is still sort of bent in the Grizzlies' favor, and that's about to change in the next few weeks. They are 0-5 in road games against Western Conference playoff contenders. Like if you throw out Utah and Portland, right, against the real teams in the West, they're 0-5 on the road. Now, five's still not very many. And only two of those games did they have John Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jared Jackson all playing, So, like, there's caveats there. But I feel like we're going to learn a lot more about this team. After Christmas, they're going to go in a stretch where 8 of
Yeah.
10 are going to be road games against good teams in the West. I think we're really going to find out some stuff in that stretch.
Yeah, that's gonna be a moment where they're gonna get pushed for certain in that road trip, and that's a long one, and it comes at a time right after Christmas when everybody's really starting to dial into the NBA. So I feel like that's gonna come with interesting timing. You make anything about them being 2-9 in LA since Ja got to Memphis? 2-9 against the Lakers in LA in the
Um,
regular
I,
season, obviously.
I, when you're talking about a sample like that over such a long period of time with different teams and different circumstances, I tend not to put much stock into that. There is like eh, one of the like the jokes people make in the NBA is
LA
like,
nightlife undefeated. Yep,
that's
that's what
right.
they say. Yep.
That's the LA flu. And so is there something to that? I couldn't tell you, but does it seem possible? Sure.
Yeah. It's disappointing. And it honestly it kind of leads into one of the things I wanted to talk about. I want to ask you later on about your trade column you
I
wrote.
mean, the Lakers are this season 9-3 at home and 5-9
They're
on the
good.
road.
They're good at
Tends
home.
team to be better at home, but that's a pretty strong home road split. That is a pretty strong like difference in home road for the Lakers. So maybe like there is that sort of that extra advantage you have when we're an LA team with other teams coming in.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the trade stuff and about we got to talk Edie, some other things, but I wrote and I felt like this was the appropriate time to ask this question. So, I mean, you tell me if this is a good time to ask this question, but you've got a loss that just happened to the Lakers and a frustrating one. The next game coming up is against the Warriors, and we all know, I mean, we can recount it, but all the drama that goes on with that game. And then you've got the Thunder playing tonight in the NBA Cup championship. And so it felt like a good time to ask the question, and I asked it on Twitter, and the Lakers ran away with it. They got more than 60% of the vote. Which current being the key here, not the team you disliked the most, but which current NBA team do you dislike the most? And I put it on Twitter, and I got a decent size votes, and more than 400, probably more than 500 by the end of it. Um, the Lakers won. I think the Warriors should win. I think you should dislike the Warriors the most if you're a Grizzlies fan at this stage.
Well, there may be some recency bias there because they just lost to the Lakers, so maybe like
Yes.
that's where the feelings were most intense. I feel like the Thunder for the moment are in a slightly different category than the Warriors or the Lakers as far as this goes. There is not actually much notable recent head-to-head history with these two teams. Now, there's history with the franchises head-to-head, a lot, but there's not a lot of notable recent. When you think about the Grizzlies games over the last 3 or 4 years, they've had a playoff series against the Warriors and the Lakers. There's not a lot of real history with these iterations of the two teams. I think with the Thunder, it's more in the area of resentment probably of like,
Yes.
like they've sort of taken the spot. It's like the young team everyone's in on. They're leading the conference. Um, with a somewhat similar structure to their team in terms of a downhill guard and a, versatile big and like depth and the whole shebang, right? Um, I think the dislike or hatred or however you phrase it, to me seems like it should be more focused on Lakers Warriors. I'm someone who would answer the Lakers to that, just because I have a lot of dislike for the sense of entitlement that exists with the Lakers and toward the Lakers. I know a lot of that is true to the Warriors as well, but I feel like it's been more earned in this era for the Warriors, right? Like the Warriors have won 4 titles in this era to the Lakers one with LeBron. And there is not as much ingrained entitlement with the franchise going back over a long period of time. With the Warriors, it really is a byproduct of the Steph Curry era. With the Lakers, it's just they feel like, it's all like whoever's next. Like once LeBron's gone, whoever else would just show up at their door. So I think I hate the Lakers more.
Yeah, I think that the way that I put this was that Golden State is spicier to me based on the
Yeah,
context of it, and we can get into it. But but the Lakers are just if you polled NBA fans across the country and said which team do you dislike the most, I think the Lakers would probably get the most votes because you
right,
either like the Lakers or you really don't like the Lakers, and there is an idea that somebody's going to show up at their doorstep the moment that LeBron James leaves, and they're always going to have a star. And of course, it's frustrating that you lost to them in a playoff series. And it's like, I went back and I just remembered like when Ja and LeBron earlier this year had the exchange where they were doing the too little at each other or whatever. And then the Grizzlies win the game, and Bronny James is posting his dad doing the too little with Ja in the background on social media. It just all felt like it was manufactured a little bit. I didn't like that. The Warriors, though, that's legitimately spicy in a lot of different ways because Draymond is always prone to come out and say something controversial. He
right.
he's come out already this year and attacked Taylor Jenkins and to some degree Zach Edey. I'm interested in hearing what Zach Edey's going to have to say about this week because I'm sure all those questions are going to come up. Essentially calling them soft and saying they're teaching him that Jenkins is teaching him to run to the media and complain about fouls. This comes after Draymond clearly tripped him on a play, and the league reviewed it and issued him a flagrant one foul after the game. So there was no real debate that it was a bad play by Draymond. It was clearly a bad play by Draymond. And then I got a good kick out of it last week when Steve Kerr's complaining about the officiating at the end of the game against Houston, doing exactly what Taylor Jenkins had done in that circumstance. And then of course there's the history with the code and breaking the code and that whole thing. And there was some dislike, I think, between Klay Thompson and a few of the Grizzlies. He's obviously moved on. So it is that to me is spicier than the Lakers potential rivalry. And I think that should be number one, just based on all the context and all the stuff around it. But on a consistent basis, I would probably say the Lakers as well.
Yeah, there's definitely a richer history with the Warriors and the Grizzlies, and I wrote a column about this a year or two ago. It's interesting how it's repeated itself. It's not just like, you have this other era that there was history. It's the same guys for the Warriors, like the same guys who had history with the core four Grizzlies also now have history with these Grizzlies because Draymond Green and Steph Curry and Steve Kerr have all been there, so long. So there's a little bit of repetition there. There's a richer history there. It sort of goes a little bit both ways a little bit. Draymond Green has been a thorn in the side. He's also sort of gone out of his way to praise the Grizzlies sometimes. He's been, I think, complimentary towards Jaren Jackson and John Morant. Like, he is a commercial where literally he's talking to his kid. He says, like, don't forget the Grizzlies or whatever. It's an interesting thing.
Yeah, and of course the Golden State Warriors are coming in town on Thursday and bringing Dennis Schroeder with them, noted Grizz killer, who they
Right.
traded for. Um, and we also had a little bit of a testiness with that on Friday night between Schroeder and Taylor Jenkins and the Nets. Now, Ja was clearly being the instigator of that game. Like with that, we have to acknowledge that that was started by Ja, but perhaps the Nets took it to the next step. But at halftime, Ja runs past Jordy Fernandez. He's just saying, yeah, 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 but he's staring him down. And Jordy Fernandez clearly didn't like that. It leads to a couple exchanges, some loud F bombs that made it through the
Right.
television mic from Taylor Jenkins, and just some heated exchanges there late. Ja said he was just trolling. He was just trying to get under the net skin and rile him up, and it worked. But did you have any thoughts there, and any thoughts on
I
Schroeder going to the Warriors?
I mean, I don't mind players. To me, people need to be less touchy. Like, Ja hits a big shot and like claps or whatever. It says, yeah, in your direction. Like, that's basketball. These guys are basketball players, right? They've never been on a playground. I mean, I don't, the
Yeah.
idea that that is like something that you should really be sensitive about and take offense to. And like, that's just being competitive and fiery and like playing basketball. So I welcome that kind of stuff. And I think people should not overreact to it. Those people being, including coaches and players. Um, Schroeder, he's a good player who can get hot and have big games. It's a good ad for the Warriors because they didn't give up anything in terms of present value because Melton was out for the year anyway. So they just add him straight up to what they had. That team has been struggling. They're 2-8 in their last 10. They've been drifting down the standings. I'll be interested. To me, the biggest thing about that trade was the question of, is it the start of more to come for both teams? Like, are the Nets starting the sale and they're starting it now and more stuff's moving out? And are the Warriors like not done? Because they still got lots of stuff to trade. And everyone seems to think they're trying to showcase Kuminga to move him, that they don't want him. They have other contracts they can deal too. I think both those teams could not be done.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Yeah, I loved the fire of that game, and I found it interesting too. I asked Jaron, like, do you like playing in the fiery games like that, like the Nets game was on Friday? And he said, yeah, it feels like most of our games have been that way since after my rookie year. And I was like, um, it seems like that aligns perfectly with when Ja Morant showed up. And he said, oh yeah, I guess that's right. But I just found that to be funny. I wonder why it was after your rookie year, Jaron.
Right.
It's maybe because the guy who's the most fiery on the court is there. But that was fun. All right, I do want to talk to you about your trade column that you wrote. But first, let's take a break for a message from our sponsor.
Want to make a big impact without getting lost in a big system? Join Youth Villages to be a force for families while becoming part of one. Help make positive changes on a national scale, one community at a time. It takes a family to transform lives. Start with yours. Apply now at youthvillages.org/careers.
All right, Chris. So when did this run? This ran
Maybe,
yesterday.
I think yesterday,
I
maybe the
think
day before.
yesterday. I think it came out yesterday. But you wrote about,
Oh, today's Tuesday. Yeah, so it came out yesterday.
yeah, you wrote about the trade market. I guess Schroeder getting traded was your excuse to go ahead and fire it off, huh?
Yeah, I was going to wait a little bit longer, but the fact that he got traded, it was sort of the first meaningful trade of the season. And so that was really like the start of things. But then also, like I said before, the signal that the Nets are selling now, I didn't want to wait and have, because the guys I was going to write about in part were Nets players. So I didn't want to wait and have those guys get traded, whether it's the Grizzlies or somewhere else, more likely, before having written. So it felt like it had to happen now.
How do we break down whether or not the Grizzlies should just make a trade in general? Because it feels like it's dicey, you know?
No, it's not. It's not at all clear. I think the Grizzlies, and so this column I wrote, if people who haven't read it, the first half of it is more general, like looking at the Grizzlies, like what do they have to trade? What kind of players should they look for? How should they think about this? And that stuff's probably more important than the made up trades that come later, even though that's kind of the fun stuff. I've grown more reluctant to do the made up trade stuff. Like if I just some personal blog, I just make up all kinds of trades. But like when you're at an actual media organization and like, your column's getting tweeted out, it's got a picture of Herb Jones on it because it has to have a picture of somebody. But like that guy probably won't even get traded, right? It just feels a
Right.
little weird. Um, and so from the Grizzlies' perspective, I think that they should be very serious about right now, about this season, about next season. They're a young team, but it's no longer about some distant future. It's about right now, trying to win right now. That doesn't necessarily mean there's some imperative to make a trade. I mean, you make a trade if you think it will make you meaningfully better right now, if it will actually move the needle for you right now. And to me, when you get into it, it's not crystal clear that that deal is there. So I don't think they should do something for the sake of doing something or to sort of show that they're doing something. But I think they should look around, and if there's something there that they think meaningfully improves their chances this season, then they should do it. And I think they should be willing to include future draft picks to do so because the roster is loaded with good players under contract, a lot of them young. There's not a lot of room to add more rookies to this roster as currently stands. And they have all their future picks going forward. So if you move one or two future picks on this roster right now, I just assuming that they're protected, I don't think it's a big deal. I think ideally for the Grizzlies, I'd want to wait till closer to the deadline to do anything because I want to learn more about this team. And in particular, I want to learn more about this team in the kind of games we talked about earlier, this tougher part of the schedule that's on the road against Western teams in late December and into January. And I want to learn more about my team with Zach Edey back. And I would love to get not Zaire Williams, Vince Williams Jr. and Gigi Jackson back. Both of those guys could be back before the deadline, right? I'd love to learn more as much about my team as I can before I make a move. But that may not be possible if there are guys you're interested in who are going to get dealt somewhere else now.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it there. And I would probably wait as well. If the longer you can wait and find out more about even other players, I don't know, you may have mentioned it, but maybe I miss it. Marcus Smart, you don't
Right.
really know what's going on with him in addition to Vince and Gigi. Um, and so I think, yeah, if you're the Grizzlies, you're not itching to do something right now, or at least I wouldn't be. You know what else I've wondered, and this kind of goes into and I haven't had the chance to really look through this, but this kind of goes towards the idea of do you make a trade for the present or are you still thinking about the future? Do you think or do you know, because I haven't looked through, if they were to trade players that are on expiring deals right now, let's say they were to trade LaRavia or Kennard,
Right.
does that at all impact their ability? I mean, obviously if they traded LaRavia, it would, but if they were to trade Kennard, does that impact potentially their ability to sign a player next year if to bring back Santi if they were to bring in a player that has multiple years left on their deal?
Yeah, I mean, any money they add is going to impact, their flexibility. It's going to impact their roster. It may impact their decision making, and that is something I referenced I think a couple times in the column, but I didn't get into specifically. That's a real question. What are their plans regarding to Santi Aldama in particular in terms of re-signing him next summer? If you trade for, say, Cam Johnson, who's the guy most people are talking about the most, who's another kind of combo forward shooter type. If you have Cam Johnson under contract for 20 something million next season and the year after, I got to think that impacts both your interest in and ability to re-sign Asante Aldama, right? And so I think as much as they should focus on right now, they have to be cognizant of what are their plans in the summer and how does what they do now impact that. So that's another layer of complication to the whole thing, sure.
Yeah, that's beyond just who you're bringing in and if it's worth sending out first round draft picks because Santi's been one of your most consistent players this season. And I think ideally you want to bring him back. It may not even be possible whether you make a trade or not because somebody could come in with a massive offer that you don't want to match or you can't.
Yeah, there are so many factors in play. It's easy to make up trades on the internet, which we all do, but it's a lot harder thing to think about all the different forces and factors in play when you finally make these decisions.
So tell us about the guys that you wrote about, the four, right? It was four. It was Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Herb Jones, and
Derek
Jones
Jones
Jr.
Jr. Yeah, I ended up not having a long list, and I went through some guys I didn't include. I thought about if I had extended it out, I may have included Adeni Avidia of Portland. DeAndre Hunter of Atlanta is a guy I think I like better than most people. I just think the contract's a little too big. There's no evidence that most of these guys are even available. Of course, teams don't advertise who's available, so it's all speculation. The commonality among all those players is that they are all wing players who can shoot and defend, who can do both to one degree or another. Like Cam Johnson, more of a shooter, Derrick Jones Jr., more of a defender, but they can all shoot and defend, and they're all bigger wings, and they all have playoff experience, other than Didi Avdia. And to me, when I look at the Grizzlies roster, that is sort of the conclusion I reach. If you start with the question, if the Grizzlies should make a trade, what kind of player should they target? That's the conclusion I reach. I think the front court has come together well enough that I don't really see an upgrade out there you would want to expend resources on. I think, coming into the season, you had Jaren Jackson Jr. and 4 question marks, and the answers from those 4 question marks have turned out positive. Brandon Clark, Santi Aldama, Zach Edey, Jay Huff. I think all of those guys you feel better about today than you did back in the summer. Scottie Pippen Jr., is he really going to help you a lot in the playoffs? I don't know. But what I do know is Ja Morant's going to play like 38 minutes a game in the playoffs, even though he's playing 28 now. And I don't see like backup point guard type necessary. Plus, I don't see the player out there who makes sense. And so to me, I look at the wing, and the wing depth chart on this team, the cohort of wings is very deep, but all of them are either on the small side, like Marcus Smart and Luke Kennard, or they have no playoff experience, like Jake LaRavia, like Jalen Wells, like Gigi Jackson, like Vince Williams Jr. There is not a single player on the roster who is a wing player with size and playoff experience. Not a single player on the roster who fits that mold. And that's an extremely important kind of player. And those players end up playing more in the playoffs and having more utility. So if I'm looking to add something to the roster, it is that kind of player I'm looking at, and all the players I focused on fit that type.
We've seen them be aggressive in the past, right? Well, at least we think, based on what's been reported for certain players. And I've always thought,
Well, I'll go beyond thinking. I know it's not like the team hasn't
right,
put out a press release, but
right,
we know they put out a big
right.
offer for Kevin Durant. We know they put out a big offer for OG Anunoby. We know they put out a big offer for Mikal Bridges. I know, and I'm not the only, Tim McMahon has said this on a podcast, but I independently know, I can back this up. They made an offer in the past for Dorian Finney-Smith. I don't think it was a big offer, but they made an offer for him before. I'm sure there are other players of that type. They've been hunting for that type of player. And I'm sure those 4 players who I know they have made trade offers for in the past is not the extent of the list. I'm sure there are others we've
Right.
known that have never gotten out there.
I have always thought that at some point, and I always turn towards like, look at what the Raptors did when they landed Kawhi Leonard and went and won a championship. Um, at some point, the Grizzlies are going to make one of these trades. Like they've done it on the margins. Luke Kennard was on the margins, but outside of that, they really haven't done
Well,
the deadline trade to
no,
try to push him over the top.
it's not a deadline trade, but Marcus Smart was one of those trades. I mean, it happened during the summer, not at the deadline, but that was the same time. It was, you don't get OG. They were searching around for these kind of players, and Marcus Smart was a sort of an unconventional version of it. But at the same time, they were putting out offers for OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges and Dorian Finney-Smith and not getting those guys. Marcus Smart is who they ended up trading for, to seek the same kind of defense on the wing, on the perimeter. And so, they made this kind of trade kind of with Justice Winslow in the past, right? So they have attempted to do it and not done it, and they have actually done it. 2 first-round picks and Tyus Jones to get Marcus Smart. But I think they still have plenty of ammunition to keep trying to upgrade the
Yeah.
team.
Well, I'm talking about when you empty the cupboard. The empty the
Well,
cupboard.
I don't see that
Right.
deal out there. I mean, that's the Jimmy Butler scenario, which people have talked about, and I entertained that briefly in the column. I just think that's a non-starter for the Grizzlies. I don't, and that's the only one out there. I don't see a deal out there that would be what's the 4 first-round picks all in, big, splashy. To me, it's not there. I don't think Brandon Ingram's good enough. And I think Jimmy Butler, who is good enough, there's so many issues with his contract and with his durability and all kinds of there's too many issues there.
Yeah, I've always thought though, at some point that they would do that. I don't know if it can be this year because it takes 2 to tango here.
Here's what happened though, and I've never really written this, and don't take this the wrong way, anyone listening. When that move happens that you're talking about, that's not going to be, and it may never happen, But if that move happens, it's not going to be the add to Ja Des Jaren move. It's going to be the break up Ja Des Jaren move. That's what Toronto did. They broke it up to try to get better, and they moved DeMar DeRozan. It's
Yep.
that move. The Grizzlies have reached the point where that move comes when you hit a ceiling with what you have, and you feel like you have
Yep.
to really switch it up. And I
Yep.
just don't think they're anywhere close to that right now.
Yes. But we're not, as you said, we're not at that stage. And I was going to
No,
say, it takes two to tango, and it doesn't really feel like there's even that option out there right now.
right.
So I wouldn't expect that they even are close to wanting to do something like that. But I do think eventually that happens. Eventually, that's the type of deal that that teams make. And I've always wondered, like, because they tried, like, what would it have taken to land Durant or
Well, that's the
Bridges
thing.
or
Durant.
anything like that?
Well,
Like,
I don't. I think the Bridges Anunoby attempts would not have broken up their core. That would have been the add the fourth guy kind of deal, and that would have been like all the look at the deals that actually were made for those players. It would have been
mhm.
similar to that, like draft picks, young players, but lots of draft picks. But Durant, no, Durant. I don't know what I don't either. Bade or Jaren Jackson would have been in that deal. I'm guessing, and I don't know which. But that is a deal. To your point, that would have forced them to break it up to make that happen. Yeah.
Okay, moving on from trade stuff. Because again, it feels like it's a little early still. It's a little early, but I'm
It,
glad you
it,
got the
it,
trade column
it
done.
is early, but we've reached the point where literally like something could happen while we're talking,
Yeah,
or nothing could
good.
happen at all, you know?
It could. Edie came back, played against the Lakers. I want to talk about him real quick before we get out of here. He was excellent, I thought, in that game. Third double double of the season. That's the type of game I said, like, that highlights the importance of his development. Because, like, if you're going to go Braun for Braun, that's your guy. And you saw it against Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis had a huge game. He's Anthony Davis. It's going to happen. But that looked like a game where, okay, that's why Zach Edey is important. Like, we need him to continue to develop and play well over the course of the season.
Yeah, and I don't know what like the plan was going in. I think the plan was to get him in the game, but he was not part of the initial rotation, right? I mean, Jay Huff and Santi Aldama both came off the bench before he got in the game. It felt like his minutes, if not his insertion, certainly his minutes, was in response to how he was playing in the matchup. So if that would just sort of would have been some other opponent, some other generic kind of night, I don't know how much he plays, but I was glad to see it. And yes, that is a matchup in particular when Zach Edey is needed by this team. But I want to see that every night. I think Jay Huff has been great, but I think for this team to be the best version of itself come playoff time, you got to get Zach Edey as ready as you can. Zach Edey's really good right now with the potential to get a lot better with more reps. And so I want to see him playing 20 something minutes every single night, period, no matter who the opponent is. I think that's important to the team.
I do think it's important to the team. I was not, I guess, not completely surprised that they decided to continue with Jay Huff because he's been really good
Oh, he's
and
been
it's
great.
hard to take him off the court. Um, you know, I was also wondering on Kennard as well because he missed the 3 games with the illness. Then he's active, but he gets a DNP. And then he comes in the second quarter. And I wonder if it was part of the plan that Jenkins did want everybody to touch the floor, even if it was super brief, just in that one game because of the circumstances. I don't know.
So the Kennard thing is interesting because I'm pretty sure, and I don't have this in front of me, so I hope I'm not misremembering, but I think this is accurate. If you go back, so he had what? He missed 3 games with illness, right?
Yeah.
And then DNP the first game afterwards, as you said. If you go back to the last game he played before the 3 game absence, I think he only played like 5 or 6 minutes. And so is the 5 minutes on the front end of that and the DNP on the back end of that related to him being under the weather and like he wasn't feeling well that last game before he was gone and he's you still is it related to that or was it related to a conscious decision to push him down the pecking order? And I think we will find out in time the answer to that. He was down the pecking order in that Lakers game and then he got in because stuff wasn't working and he started making shots and you're playing better with him on the floor. But there's a real squeeze right now, and this is even without Vince Williams Jr. or Gigi Jackson in the mix. And the way Jalen Wells has played in terms of giving you shooting with better defense, because you're not going to put Luke Kennard, not going to say go chase around Damian Lillard or whatever, right? Like that's not going to be his role. Wells can play that role and give you off-ball shooting at the same time. So it makes sense that Wells has sort of usurped Kennard in the pecking order. But you get to a game, against a good team on the road and you're struggling, and Wells wasn't playing that great. And Kennard's, you put him out there and he starts making things happen. So it's an interesting decision for Taylor Jenkins.
You mentioned that you think Edie should play 20 minutes every single game. Should they be just starting him based on matchups at this point?
I think I don't have a strong opinion about that. I would be fine if they did that. I'd be fine if they didn't. The Brandon Clark thing has gone great. It was interesting that, I don't know whether you had a feel for this. I was just sort of surprised by it. I think Brandon Clark he played like 5 minutes in the first half or something against the Lakers. And it didn't feel like Brandon Clark himself was like the problem, like the whole team was playing poorly. So I didn't know what was up with the Brandon Clark minute stuff against the Lakers early. At some point, ED was just playing better and that was a better matchup. So there you go. Um, I am not like, I would not like write something and say the Grizzlies need to change their starting lineup. So I'm kind of fine with it either way. But I think that would be defensible. I do think there are matchups where you need that size. And if you just want to say from the jump, we need it from the jump and let's not get to it. Let's start with it. I think that'd be a totally defensible path.
On the Brandon Clark thing. So I wonder if I actually I would guess that that's matchup related because if you listened, did you see? I actually embedded it in the brief game story I wrote. The clip from JJ Redick before the game talking about the Grizzlies offense.
The
Did you
wheel.
catch
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah, the wheel stuff, but he talked a lot about you know exactly what they're going to do. It's transition. They're not going to run a play. They're going to try to shoot within 8 seconds, and they're going to try to get to the middle of the court over and over and over again. The middle of the court, the middle of the court, the middle of the court. They're going to get middle every single time. Um, and the Lakers played that entire game out as if they knew exactly what the Grizzlies were going to do, even though the Grizzlies were running random offense by just trying to take the middle of the floor away and just having
Right.
guys standing there the entire game. And it was effective in the first half for sure. It didn't help that the Grizzlies couldn't make a layup, but it was somewhat effective. And if that's the style they're going to play, how does Brandon Clark help you?
Yeah.
How does Brandon Clark help you, right? You either need somebody that can step out and shoot, or you
Because you
need
don't
somebody that
want,
can match the physicality of Davis.
well, you don't want the Brandon Clark you got early in the season, you know, who would spread out and then clank threes from the corner. And one of the adjustments Clark made was that when he would get the ball in that situation, he wouldn't shoot. He would either drive into the middle or he would set a screen, roll into the middle, and get the action going that way where he's better. So you don't want to get back to Brandon Clark as a non-effective floor spacer, right? That is not good basketball for you. So yeah, I mean it's an interesting question. I mean, we'll see as teams grow more accustomed to what the Grizzlies are doing. Do they defend it better? How do the Grizzlies react to that? That's sort of the way playoff basketball works, right? That's sort of a smaller version of that, like in terms of like being able to adjust what you do. And I do think while the Grizzlies system has been working, I do believe ultimately in the idea of adjusting, of focusing on matchups, focusing on your best players. I don't think it's as simple as like just run the system all the time.
So the Grizzlies are currently second in the Western Conference, 3 games back of OKC. Um, do you have a hard time believing this? Let me put it this way: you came on here and you were high on the Houston Rockets, and
Yeah.
I was not high on the Houston Rockets. And I've been in denial about the Houston Rockets still to this point because if you go look at who the Houston Rockets have beaten, it's not all that impressive. They got a win over OKC. It was the end of their road trip. It was kind of sneaky. They got that win over Golden State. I thought they were kind of fortunate to escape with that off the foul call. I just didn't want to buy it, but feels like you could kind of say the same thing about the Grizzlies. So
Yeah.
maybe I should just shut up when it relates to that. Is it hard to gauge where the Grizzlies are at this point in the season? The same way I feel about the Rockets.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's deep as we are into the season. The Grizzlies have had an advantageous schedule. If you go look at just strictly based on opponent winning percentage, which is not, there are other things you could look at, but strictly based on that, the Grizzlies have the hardest schedule left the rest of the way. Um, but if you look at that list in totality, basically like all the teams at the top in terms of schedule remaining difficulty are from the West, all teams at the bottom are from the East. It's not that big of a difference, right, between the Grizzlies and most of the other teams in the West. I think we'll learn a lot more about both of those teams and all these teams over the next month or so, like I was saying. I I was a big believer in the Rockets in the sense that I like the Rockets best of all the teams that were everyone was putting in the play-in race or just below the play-in race. Like I like them better than the Lakers and the Kings and the Pelicans and the Clippers and all of that. But I didn't think they were going to be a top three team in the West, and I still don't. By the way, I think they are likely to drift down a little bit. I think maybe the Grizzlies could drift down at least one spot. Dallas is the team that I look at and say, like, to me, that's the most solid of these teams, below Oklahoma City. And so I sort of suspect the Mavericks may drift up, and I could see the Rockets drifting down. But I do think to me, they look like they're going to be a top six team in the West, just because in the regular season, because I think their depth and defense is such. I wonder about that team in playoff basketball when you get down to like 6 minutes of a tight game and where's your offense coming from. I think their answer to that is not as strong as the answer that Oklahoma City and Memphis and Dallas and Denver and Phoenix and some of these teams have because they have elite offensive players to have the ball, and I don't think Houston does.
Who's the most surprising team in the NBA? I think
Uh,
Orlando, maybe, given their circumstances.
I
Clippers
mean,
are 15 and 12.
given the injuries, Orlando would not be surprising at all if they were healthy. I mean, I thought Cleveland would be good, but not that good. It might, I mean, Brooklyn in some ways, but that's over now. It might be Houston, actually. Even the
Yeah.
people who most believed in Houston did not believe in them as a top three team in the West, which is what they are right now. So maybe Houston is the answer to that.
As we sit here, it's shaping up to be a fun race. Um, New Orleans has completely fallen off. Like that's done.
Yeah.
You can't
No
make the
coming back from
playoffs at
five
this
and
stage, but you
no
can miss
coming
the
back from
playoffs.
5-22. Five
Yeah,
and 22 is a rough place to be.
they're done. So they were one of the teams in the mix, right? But I don't think the Clippers are better than anticipated. We'll see where they end up finishing, but they're better. Right now, you've got San Antonio and Sacramento on the outside looking in the Western Conference. I thought the Kings would be better than this, and the stats for their stars are great, but having
I
the
think I think two things about the Kings. One, it has been revealed that the back half of their roster is terrible. It's like Denver level bad, but they don't have Jokic, right? And so that's kind of the problem. I still think that team's probably better than their record and better than where they are in the standings. I would be willing. I think I would predict that the Kings will finish ahead of the Clippers by the time you get to the end of the season.
you are Mr. Minneapolis or St. Paul, Mr.
I'm
St. Paul.
I'm Mr. St. Paul.
Mr. St. Paul. So tell us what's going on with the Timberwolves. I feel like I haven't heard anything about the Timberwolves this year.
It's been well, they were more notable when they were struggling early, and they were maybe the league's most disappointing team. They've gotten it back together a little bit. They've been drifting up the standings. They're right now tied for sixth with Phoenix. I think Minnesota's going to finish as the top six team. Wouldn't surprise me if they got up to like fourth or something like that. And so I think they are better than they have been. But I think they are not as good as people thought they were going to be, or they thought they were going to be, and I don't think that's going to change. And I think one of the problems, one of the things I'd be concerned about if I'm Minnesota is they're 14 and 11. They've been one of the healthiest teams in the league, and they've had trouble integrating the new guys and everything. But I think Mike Conley is just diminished, and it's not going to change. I think Rudy Gobert, as good as he is now on the downside of what he was. And I think the get to the final ceiling that team thought people thought that team thought it had going into the season. I don't think they're getting that back.
Yeah. Um, The other day, as I was watching these NBA Cup games, I was just like looking at the West. And I think it's pretty telling that you could essentially, outside of, I think, the Clippers, if you said that the Grizzlies were playing against any of the teams in the top 10 in a playoff series, you're probably going, I don't know. It feels
Right.
risky, right? If they get the Lakers in a playoff series again, who's going to feel good about that? I don't think anybody, based on the way that they've performed in Los Angeles and what Anthony Davis has done. Like a bunch of these other teams are crazy experienced. Like you're gonna play Denver with their pedigree. Like I don't know. Um,
Well,
Phoenix,
so
obviously, star power, Minnesota, Golden State. Like it doesn't matter who you match the Grizzlies up with. That's going to be extremely difficult. First round. First
well, I
round.
mean, this has been the story. I mean, the Grizzlies, their two series losses, the last two series losses, throughout the first year they got there against Utah when Utah was the one and the Grizzlies were the eight. But the two series losses they had after that, the Grizzlies were the higher seed. Grizzlies lost as the higher seed to the Warriors and the next year to the Lakers. And in both cases, you look up and you're the higher seed, but that team's got LeBron James and that team's got Steph Curry. And those guys are all time greats who have won titles. And you're not. You're young. I mean, they are more accomplished than you, even though you're the higher seed. And there is definitely a case you get to a similar situation. Like, when you look up and it's one of those two situations, or it's Kevin Durant with Phoenix, or it's Luca, who just took Dallas to the NBA Finals, or it's Jokic, who's won a title. There's a lot of bigger stars who have accomplished more lower in the standings than the Memphis Grizzlies. And so it feels like that's the thing that the Grizzlies have to break through in the postseason. They have not to this point.
All right. Let's get out of here. First, give me an NBA Cup pick. You want the Thunder or the Bucks?
The Thunder are clearly the better team, even though Giannis is truly on one. It's too bad Chet Holmgren's not in that game. That'd be fun to see. But I'm going to go with the Thunder in that one.
Okay. Just to be against you, I'll go Bucks.
All
I
right.
was higher on the Bucks. And Giannis is truly, truly, and I tell this to people. He's one of those players that's an experience to watch in person because he's so much bigger in person than he is on TV. Um, so sure, I'll take the Bucks. All right, that's gonna do it for us this week. Make sure you go check out all our stuff over at the Daily Memphian. I know the Memphis Tigers football team is playing in a bowl game the night we are recording this on Tuesday. They're going to take on West Virginia, so make sure you're following Frank Bonner and reading all his stuff from the Scooters Coffee Frisco Bowl in Frisco, Texas.
All right.
Scooters Coffee. I've never had it. Maybe I'll go get a Scooters Coffee today. There's a Scooters Coffee in Memphis, I think, somewhere.
I believe there is. I believe there is. Yeah.
But yeah, make sure you're going and checking out all that out. We had a ton of sports coverage. Tigers rolling. They have big games coming up. Chris and I writing about the Grizzlies. Should be super fun, super fun on Thursday night when the Warriors come to town. So keep up with all the Daily Memphian stuff. But until next time, for Drew and for Chris, we're out of here.